Im Song-jun said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed in his head until it stops feeling cruel. You are my employee, Nia. That is all you have ever been. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She stood in his office at 11:17 on a Wednesday night, rain battering the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. And she absorbed those words the way a person absorbs a car accident. The first second is always too fast to feel. He watched her face. She knew he was watching. She refused to give him the collapse he was secretly terrified of producing. She placed his files on the corner of his desk, straightened the edges, looked at him one last time with something he would spend the next 6 months trying to name. Then she left. If you have ever loved someone in silence for years, watching them need you every single day while they looked through you like glass, stay with us. Because Nia Bellamy's story is not about losing a man. It is about a woman who finally decided her silence had a price. And the man who only understood that price after she was already gone. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss the stories that stay with you. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Like this video, and let's begin. The night it ended had started like every other dangerous night in the 5 years Nia Bellamy had spent inside Im Song-jun's world. She had worn the black dress, not because anyone told her to, because she knew, from years of reading rooms before Seung-jun even entered them, that the Kwon family representatives responding to tonight's waterfront negotiation were traditional men who made fast judgments based on appearance, and a woman who looked powerful without trying to announce it made those men instinctively cautious. Caution was useful. Caution kept people from posturing. She had the briefing notes memorized before the car reached the docks. She always had the notes memorized. The negotiation lasted 3 hours. Seung-jun sat at the head of the table, and he was good at that, the stillness, the voice that didn't rise even when the air in the room did, the way he made silence feel like a decision. But 3 times during those 3 hours, when the Kwon side pushed on shipping rate structures Sung-jun had never personally managed, it was Nia who answered. Quietly, precisely, without making it look like she was rescuing him. That was the skill nobody saw, making the man at the head of the table look like he already knew everything she was telling him. By 10 o'clock, the deal was structured. By 10:45, the Kwon representatives had signed the initial framework and were being escorted to their cars. By 11, Seung-jun and Nia were alone in the elevator, riding back to his 42nd floor office, and the rain outside had thickened into something that sounded like gravel against glass. He didn't speak in the elevator. That was not unusual. After high-stakes negotiations, Seung-jun went quiet, the way machinery goes quiet after it stops running, not peaceful, just temporarily still. Nia had learned years ago not to fill that silence with reassurance. He didn't want reassurance. He wanted the space to process without performing for anyone. She respected that. She respected most things about him, even the parts that made her life harder. Back in his office, she set her bag on the chair nearest the door, pulled the secondary contract addendum from the briefing folder, and began noting the 3 clauses she wanted reviewed before the formal agreement reached the attorneys. Standard procedure. The kind of thing she did automatically, at 11 at night, in heels without being asked. She was halfway through the second clause when she heard him say it. You were watching me tonight. Nia kept her pen moving. I watch every negotiation, not like that. His voice was different. She noticed immediately the way you notice a room change temperature, without being able to say exactly when it shifted. You were watching me like you were worried about me. She set the pen down, turned around slowly. Song-jun was standing at the window. The city stretched behind him, blurred and wet, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 5 years. Something unguarded. Something that made her chest do a thing she immediately tried to suppress. I was making sure the negotiation went smoothly, she said. That's my job. Nia. She hated the way he said her name sometimes. Like it was a question and an accusation at the same time. What is this about? She asked, because she knew. She had known for weeks that something had been building in him, some awareness he was circling without being willing to land on. She had been careful. She had been so careful. 5 years of careful. Song Jun turned from the window. He crossed the room until he was close enough that she could hear the rain still on his jacket, and he looked at her face with the focused attention he usually reserved for men. He was deciding whether to trust with his money. "I see it," he said quietly. "I don't know when I started seeing it, but I see it." Nia's pulse was doing something she would not let reach her expression. "You see what? The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." The silence that followed was one of the longest of her life. She was good at silence. She had built a career on it. But this particular silence had a weight to it that pressed against her sternum and made breathing a conscious act. She thought about lying. She was capable of it. She had lied through omission for 5 years. Instead, she said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. And then Seong Jun did the thing that changed everything. He took a step back, not toward her, back, as if he had looked at the edge of something and chosen not to jump. And then the expression that had been open on his face closed like a door being shut from the inside. And when he spoke again, his voice had the precise, uninflected quality she associated with his boardroom voice, the one that meant he had decided something and was not interested in being argued with. "You are my employee," he said, "my executive assistant. That is the nature of our relationship. That has always been the nature of our relationship." Nia held herself very still. "I think," he continued, and each word was careful in the way a boot is careful crossing ice, "that you may have allowed the professional closeness of your role to create a misunderstanding about my personal feelings. That is understandable. But I want to be clear with you because I respect you professionally, and clarity is more honest than silence." He met her eyes. "I don't love you, Nia. I never have. Not in the way you're hoping for." She heard it. She processed it. She stood in the center of his office in the black dress she had chosen to help him succeed tonight. With the contract addendum she had been annotating for his benefit still in her hand, and she heard Im Seong-jun explain to her that 5 years of her life had been a professional relationship she had simply missed. She placed the addendum on his desk, set her pen beside it, picked up her bag. "The Quan addendum needs attorney review on clauses 7, 12, and 19, she said. "The shipping schedule reconciliation is on the shared drive in the folder marked November. Your 9 o'clock tomorrow has been confirmed." Song Jun watched her. "Good night," Nia said. She walked to the elevator. She rode it down 42 floors without moving her face. She crossed the lobby, walked into the rain, and stood on the sidewalk for 11 seconds before her hands began to shake. She did not cry. She called a car. She did not cry on the ride home either. She looked out the window at the wet Seattle streets, and she breathed through her nose at a measured pace, and she thought clearly, systematically about everything she needed to do before morning. Because the thing about Nia Bellamy was this: she had always known this moment was a possibility. Not this exact conversation, not these exact words, but the possibility that she had miscalculated, that the man she had quietly loved for 5 years was not capable of loving her back, or was capable of it but chose not. That possibility had lived in the back of her mind for years. She had always known, and knowing had made her careful in ways Seong-jun had never understood. There was a go bag under her bed, had been for 3 years. Not because she feared him, because she feared becoming someone who had no way out. Cash, a burner phone, a passport and driver's license under the name Naomi Burke, a name she had built through entirely legal channels, a process she had researched quietly and completed in pieces over 18 months. An emergency credit card attached to an account he had no knowledge of. A list of cities where she had no connections, where nobody would look for a woman matching her description. The list had begun as professional caution. She worked inside a criminal organization. Things went wrong inside criminal organizations. A smart woman had contingency plans. But tonight, unpacking the bag in her apartment at 12:40 in the morning, Nia understood that the contingency plan had always been for this. She packed efficiently. She took what was hers and nothing else. She left the expensive clothes he had indirectly influenced, the business wardrobe chosen to fit the version of herself that existed only in his orbit. She took her grandmother's earrings, the ones with the small blue stones, because those had never belonged to his world. She took the 2 photograph prints. She had framed herself not of him, never of him, but of her mother and her sister from 5 years ago, before she had followed Seongjun's operation so deeply inside that she had lost track of the distance between her life and his. By 3 in the morning, her apartment was as empty as she could make it. By 3:45, she had written a resignation letter. 2 sentences. Professional. No explanation. She submitted it through the company's formal HR system and emailed a copy to his office address, because Nia Bellamy was someone who did things properly even when she was leaving in the dark. By 4:15, her car was on the interstate, and the city of Seattle was behind her, lit up and wet and indifferent. She drove south through rain so heavy, the wipers couldn't keep up with it. She drove for 4 hours, without stopping, and without music, which was unusual for her. She was a person who almost always had something playing. But tonight the silence felt necessary, like something she owed herself. She pulled off at a rest stop, somewhere on the Oregon coast, as the sky began going gray at the edges, and she sat in the parking lot and ate crackers from her bag and drank cold water and looked at the ocean. She couldn't quite see in the dark. She sounded like green wood splitting. She thought about him standing at that window. She thought about the moment before he spoke, when he had been close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face, and his expression had been, for just a second, completely honest. Unguarded in a way she had never seen. Then she thought about what he said after that. And she started the car. She found Black Harbor 3 days later. Not because she had been looking for it specifically, but because she was low on gas, and the exit sign had a picture of a fishing boat on it, and something in her decided that was enough of a reason. It was exactly what the sign implied: a working coastal town, cold and gray, the kind of place where people wore the same jacket every day because the jacket worked, and there was no particular reason to own more than one. A harbor with actual fishing vessels, a main street with a hardware store, 2 diners, a pharmacy, a laundromat, and a bar. No luxury, no performance, no requirement that she be anything other than a woman who had just arrived and needed work. The marina at the harbor's edge had a handwritten sign in the window. Bookkeeper needed. Part-time. The handwriting was the kind that belonged to someone who had never thought much about how they formed their letters. The man behind the counter was named Earl Duchamp, and he was 63, and he had been running the marina for 31 years. And he explained all of this within the first 4 minutes of conversation, with the directness of a person who had no interest in small talk. "You have experience?" he asked. "Yes," Nia said. "With what?" "Financial systems, contract management, accounts, multi-entity bookkeeping." Earl looked at her with the expression of a man who was trying to figure out why someone with those qualifications was standing in his marina office, asking about a part-time bookkeeping job. Nia looked back at him and said nothing. "Pay's not great," he said. "The pay is fine. Hours are irregular. Fishing industry. Things happen. Irregular is fine." He studied her for another moment. Then he nodded once, the way people nod when they've decided to trust their instinct over their logic. "Start Monday," he said. She found a room above the laundromat on Calder Street. It was small and cold, and the radiator made a sound at night, like something was trapped inside it. The window looked out at the back of a hardware store and a strip of gray sky. She paid 3 months up front in cash, which made the landlord ask no further questions. She became Naomi Burke. She bought jeans from the thrift store on the Harbor Road. Thick sweaters, work boots, things that were warm and plain and practical, nothing that needed to be ironed. She let her hair be what it was without the flat iron, and the product she had used for 5 years, because the executive assistant to a criminal organization's CEO was expected to present a certain way. She looked different without all of that. She looked like herself. That was the first. Strange standing in the bathroom of the room above the laundromat and looking in the spotted mirror and recognizing the woman looking back as someone she had not seen in a long time. The work at the marina was easy in the way that work is easy, when your capacity far exceeds what's required. Earl's books were a disaster, not corrupt, just neglected. A sound like green wood splitting, the kind of accumulated disorder that happens when a person who is good at running a marina spends 31 years not particularly caring about the difference between accounts payable and accounts receivable. Nia organized it in 2 weeks. Then she started on the vendor contracts. Then the slips lease agreements, which had not been properly structured in at least 6 years. Earl watched her work with the expression of a man who had accidentally hired a surgeon to do a splinter removal and was not entirely comfortable with how thoroughly she was being about it. "You're overqualified," he told her one afternoon. The job needed doing, she said. He let it go. He was the kind of person who could recognize when someone needed to be left alone inside their work, and he left her alone inside hers. She ate dinner at the same diner most nights, a place called Cora's, run by a woman named Cora, whose relationship with verbal communication was minimal, and whose relationship with adequate portions was generous. Nia ate there alone and read on her phone and watched the other regulars, the fishermen and the dock workers and the couple who came in every Friday and sat at the same table and argued quietly and then held hands before they paid the bill. She watched that couple more than she intended to. She thought about Seattle less than she expected to. Or rather, she thought about Seattle constantly, but not in the way she had expected, not with longing, not with the desperate weight of someone who had left a love story unfinished. She thought about it the way you think about an accident you barely survived, with the numb clarity of someone still working out how close it had been. She had given 5 years to that man, 5 years of herself, not just her labor, not just her expertise, not just the 100 small ways she had sustained his empire from the inside, but the actual interior of herself. She had organized her emotional life around him without his knowledge, had loved him quietly and carefully, had convinced herself that loyalty without confession was a kind of dignity. What she understood now, driving south in the rain, and understood more clearly each week in the cold room above the laundromat, was that quiet love is still love. Unexpressed sacrifice is still sacrifice. And a man who benefits from both without ever choosing to see them is not blameless simply because he never asked. The 6th week in Black Harbor, 3 men arrived at the marina. She heard about them. Before she saw them, Earl mentioned offhandedly that some people had come around asking about the slip fees, talking about a management services arrangement the marina would be expected to participate in. He said it with the resigned weariness of a man who already knew what the conversation meant and had already decided he was too old to fight about it. Nia looked up from her ledger. "What management services?" she asked. Earl shrugged. "They collect from about 6 businesses on the harbor. Property protection. That's what they call it." "How much?" $1,200 a month. "And you're paying it?" "Have been for 2 years." Earl looked at his hands. Before that, one of their guys broke the fuel dock pumping equipment. I got the message. Nia was quiet for a moment. "Are they coming back?" she asked. Friday, she nodded, went back to the ledger. On Friday, the 3 men arrived at 11 in the morning. One was large and wore a jacket with a local freight company's logo on the breast pocket. One was younger, probably 22, trying very hard to look casual. The third was the one who did the talking medium height, a little soft around the edges, the kind of man who was used to being the most confident person in rooms he had carefully selected for his own comfort. Nia was at the desk when they came in. She said nothing. She kept working. The talker addressed Earl and asked about the monthly arrangement. Earl looked at Nia involuntarily, which was not helpful because it told the talker that Nia was someone who mattered in the office. The talker looked at Nia. "You the new girl?" "Bookkeeper," she said. Still not looking up. "Then you know how the numbers work. $1,200 a month keeps things running smoothly around here." Earl understands that. Nia put her pen down. She looked at the talker for the first time. "I reviewed the marina's accounts for the past 2 years, she said. Her voice was completely even. "I know you've collected $14,400 from this location in that time. I also know from the business registration records that your freight company's operating license lapsed 8 months ago. I know the vehicle your colleague drove here this morning is registered to an address that doesn't exist. And I know that the 2 calls made from that number to this marina in the last 30 days were placed from a phone registered to a man currently on supervised release who is prohibited from participating in any commercial collection activity. The room was extremely quiet. What I don't know yet, Nia continued, is whether you'd prefer I share that information with the licensing board first or the parole office. The large man in the freight company jacket had stopped moving. The young one looked at the talker. The talker looked at Nia with the expression of a man recalibrating very rapidly. You don't know who you're dealing with, he said. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, she said. You're a mid-level extortion operation with a geographic territory limited to this harbor district, a total of 11 client businesses, and a monthly revenue of approximately $14,000. You have no meaningful legal protection and no organizational backing sophisticated enough to survive regulatory scrutiny. You are not dangerous. You are inconvenient. She picked up her pen. Come back here again, and I will make you significantly more than inconvenient. Nobody moved for a moment. Then the talker turned around and walked out. The large man followed. The young one looked at Nia for one more second before he went. Earl stood very still for a long time after the door closed. Who are you? He said. Nia looked at him across the desk. Your bookkeeper, she said. The men did not come back. Whatever calculation they had run on the other side of that conversation had come out badly for them, and they apparently decided it wasn't worth finding out what came next. The story of what happened in the marina office that Friday spread the way stories spread in small towns, which is to say immediately and with significant elaboration. By the following week, Nia was described in Cora's diner as a former federal investigator, a corporate attorney, a woman who had once worked for the IRS, and her personal favorite, a retired spy. She corrected none of these. She drank her coffee and read her phone, and let the elaborations accumulate around her, which was its own kind of protection. What she didn't know was that one version of the story, stripped of its coastal embellishment, had traveled north through a supply chain route, passed through someone who owed a favor to someone who worked adjacent to someone in Seattle, and arrived eventually on the desk of a man who had spent the past 6 weeks dismantling his own organization from the inside looking for her. A black woman, plus size, quiet, financial mind, made 3 extortionists leave a marina office in Black Harbor, Oregon, using nothing but a ledger and a voice that didn't rise. Im Song-jun read the description twice. Then he put on his coat. The drive from Seattle to Black Harbor took 6 hours in good weather. Im Seong-jun made it in 5 hours and 20 minutes, which meant he drove the way he did most things when he had decided something without particular regard for the rules that existed to slow other people down. His driver offered twice to take the wheel. Seong-jun declined both times without looking away from the road. He drove alone. That was not typical. In 5 years of running an organization that required him to be either the most visible or the least visible person in any room, depending on the situation, he had almost never traveled without at least one other person in the vehicle. Security was not vanity for him. It was operational logic. But he didn't want witnesses for whatever was about to happen in Black Harbor, Oregon. He didn't entirely know what was about to happen. That was the problem. He had spent 6 weeks being a man who spent 6 things he was accustomed to knowing, and it had made him shorter with everyone around him and colder with himself, and neither of those adjustments had improved anything. His organization was technically functional. His lieutenants were managing the operational pieces. The accounts had stabilized after the first chaotic 2 weeks, when it became apparent that several financial access protocols had been set up by Nia in ways that required her specific authorization to modify. That had been the first real shock, not that she had left. He had understood, watching her walk to his elevator, that she was actually leaving, not performing, not waiting to be called back, not constructing a leverage scenario. She was leaving in the way a person leaves, when they have already made peace with the cost. The shock was what happened to the machinery of his life in her absence. The second week without her, he had missed a call from the Sodom city councilman's office that Nia had been managing for 8 months, a relationship she had been cultivating carefully, because the councilman's infrastructure committee had authority over 3 port access. agreements that Songjun's freight operation depended on. Songjun hadn't known the relationship existed until his operations manager informed him, with visible discomfort, that the councilman's chief of staff had called 3 times and was now discussing their business with the competing freight operator. The third week, a payment dispute with one of their restaurant supply chains had escalated to a formal legal notice because nobody had processed the quarterly reconciliation that Nia had apparently been handling manually rather than through their accounting firm, because she had determined 3 years ago that the accounting firm was making errors the restaurant clients would eventually notice, and she had quietly corrected the process without telling anyone. By week 4, his head of security, Park Junho, had come into his office and sat down without being invited, which was something Park Junho had done exactly once before in 4 years of working together, and said, "We need to talk about what she was actually doing." Seong-jun had looked at him. "Because it wasn't assistant work," Park said. "I've been going through what we can access. She was managing 17 separate relationships we didn't know were centralized through her. She was running a conflict early warning system. She had back channels with 4 of our supplier contacts that were entirely informal, meaning if she's gone, those contacts have no formal connection to us anymore. They were loyal to her specifically." Seonjin had said nothing. "And the financial architecture," Park continued. "Our accountants spent a week trying to map it. She built redundancy into everything, which means nothing failed catastrophically when she left, but there are access layers that require her credentials or her specific knowledge to restructure. We can work around them, but it's going to take months, and it's going to require disclosing the architecture to outside consultants, which creates exposure." Seong-jun had looked at his desk for a long moment. "She did all of that deliberately," he said. "Not a question. Some of it was probably just how she built things: careful, redundant, professionally sound. But some of it," Park paused, "some of it looks like contingency planning. Like she knew there was a version of events where she'd need to leave, and she wanted to make sure she could do it cleanly. Or she wanted to make sure I'd feel it. Possibly both," Park said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Song-jun had dismissed Park after that and sat alone in his office for a long time. The city was visible through the rain-blurred windows, the same way it had been the night Nia left, and he kept returning to the moment before he spoke. The moment when he had been standing close enough to see the exact expression on her face, the thing she had been so carefully controlling for so long, and he had recognized it and felt it like a hand closing around his throat. He had been terrified. That was the truth he had not admitted to anyone, including himself, for 6 weeks. He had been standing in his office at 11 at night, and he had looked at Nia Bellamy and understood that she loved him, and that it was not an assistant's professional devotion, and not a woman making a calculation about proximity to power, but the real thing, the sustained, quiet, costly thing, and the terror had come so fast, he hadn't been able to manage it properly. Because if she loved him, and if he acknowledged it, and if he let himself feel what he had been refusing to name for at least 2 years, then he was vulnerable in a way he had no framework for. He had learned very early, in ways that had left marks he didn't discuss, that vulnerability was where you got hurt. That need was what people used against you. So he had done what he did when something threatened his control. He had destroyed it first. He knew that now. He had known it within 48 hours of watching her elevator doors close. He had simply spent 6 weeks not knowing what to do with the knowledge. When the description arrived from Black Harbor, he had his answer, or at least the beginning of one. He pulled into Black Harbor just after 2 in the afternoon. The town was exactly what the description had suggested: compact, weathered, smelling of fish and diesels and salt, the kind of place that had no interest in impressing anyone. He found the marina without difficulty. It occupied the southern edge of the harbor, a collection of weathered dock structures, fuel pumps, and a small office building with a corrugated metal roof that sounded like a drum when the wind shifted. He sat in the parked car for 4 minutes. He was not someone who sat in parked cars thinking about what to say. He entered rooms and he read them and he responded. That was how he operated. Deliberation before arrival was a kind of anxiety he had trained out of himself decades ago. but this was not a room he knew how to read in advance. He got out of the car. The marina office was warmer than the outside air, heated by a unit mounted above the door that was working hard and not quite winning. There was a metal desk near the back wall. Behind it, Nia Bellamy sat with a ledger open in front of her, and a pen in her right hand, and her reading glasses on the end of her nose, which was something he had never seen before in 5 years, because she had apparently worn contacts in his office, and he had never thought to wonder if that was a choice she made for herself, or a performance she made for his environment. She heard the door. She looked up. The moment stretched. She did not look shocked. That was the first thing he registered. And it landed somewhere specific in his chest. She was not shocked, because she had probably understood from the moment the extortionists failed to return that the story would travel and the story would reach him. She had been waiting, and she had waited without leaving again, which meant something, though he was not entirely sure. Yet what? What she looked like was tired. Not she looked like slept, but the tired of someone who has been carrying something heavy for longer than they planned to and has almost gotten used to the weight. She looked underneath the tiredness, like herself. More so than he could remember seeing in years. The hair, the clothes, the absence of the particular composed armor she had worn every day in his office. She looked like a woman who had put something down and discovered. Her arms didn't know what to do without the weight. "You drove," she said. "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. She did not close the ledger. He noticed that the ledger stayed open. The pen stayed in her hand, as if she was not committing to this conversation being the thing that displaced her work. "How did you find me?" she said. Not quite a question. "Your marina made the rounds. There's a story going around the Oregon coast about a bookkeeper who frightened 3 men out of a protection scheme using accounts receivable." Something moved across her face. Not quite amusement, but related to it. "Sit down," she said. Then immediately, "Actually, don't. There's only the client chair, and Earl uses it for boxes." Seong Jun looked at the chair in question, which did in fact have a box of invoice binders on it. He moved the box to the floor and sat down. An older man appeared in the doorway that connected the office to the dock area, weathered face, gray work jacket, the expression of someone trying to decide if this was his business. "It's fine, Earl," Nia said without turning around. Earl looked at Song Jun with the flat evaluating look of a man who had spent 30 years reading people who came to his dock. Whatever he read in Song Jun's face apparently fell within an acceptable range, because he went back through the doorway without comment. Song Jun and Nia were alone. "The accounts," Nia said. "Is that why you came?" "No, then lead with the actual reason." He looked at her for a moment. She looked back at him, without flinching and without performing patience, just waiting, because she had learned years ago that waiting was a thing she was good at, and he was not. "I handled that night wrong," he said. She said nothing. "What I said to you, what you said to me was deliberate," Nia said. Her voice was even, not cold exactly, but controlled in the way water is controlled by a dam, and he was aware, not as he had not always been, that there was a considerable volume of pressure behind that control. "You knew exactly what you were saying. You knew what it would do." "That's not a mistake, Seong Jun. A mistake is forgetting a meeting or miscounting a shipment. What you did was a choice." He didn't argue with that. "You're right." She looked at him with the expression of someone who had prepared to push back against a denial and was slightly wrong-footed by the absence of one. "The accounts are functioning," she said, shifting. "The security architecture will restore full access automatically after a period of non-interaction. You don't need anything from me operationally. Your people are competent. I didn't come about the accounts. I heard you the first time." She looked down at the ledger briefly, then back at him. "Then say what you came to say." I lied. The room was very quiet. Outside, something metal was being shifted on the dock, and the wind moved through the gap under the office door with a thin, persistent whistle. "I lied to you that night," Seong Jun said. "I said things I knew were not true because I was—" He stopped. Started again. "Because feeling something that significant about another person and having that person know it is the most dangerous position I know how to be in. And I responded to the danger the way I respond to everything that threatens my control." Nia was looking at him with an expression he could not fully decode. Not softening, not that, watchful. You destroyed it preemptively, she said. Yes. You decided that hurting me was safer than being vulnerable to me. Yes. She nodded, slowly, not in agreement in the way a person nods when they are confirming something they already knew, and were waiting to hear confirmed out loud. I appreciate you saying that, she said. I do. But I need you to understand something. She set the pen down on the desk, which he recognized as a significant gesture. The pen had been a barrier of sorts, something to hold. The lie itself is not what I can't forgive. People lie. People get scared and say things they don't mean. What I keep coming back to, what I have been coming back to for 6 weeks in this freezing room above a laundromat, is that you knew where I was vulnerable. You knew exactly where to strike because I had trusted you with that knowledge over 5 years. And when you were afraid, you used it like a weapon. Songjun said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. That's not something that happened in a moment of panic, Nia continued. That's a pattern. That is who you are when you are afraid. And I needed to know, before I had that conversation, what would be different now. She was not crying. Her voice was not rising. This was not a performance of grief. This was a woman with a forensic mind, applying that mind to the question of whether a man was capable of change, and the question was genuine, and the stakes of the answer were real. I don't have a clean answer to that, Songjun said. I know. What I can tell you is that the 6 weeks since you left have been... He stopped again. This was harder than anything he had negotiated in a decade. Across a table from men who wanted to take things from him, he was precise and controlled. Here in this cold office, in a fishing town, he kept losing the thread of what he meant. I've been learning how much I didn't know. About my own operation. About what you were actually doing inside it. About how much I had allowed myself not to see, because seeing would have required acknowledging what you were to me. And what was I to you? The question landed with its full weight. He looked at her across the battered desk, with the open ledger and the box of invoice binders on the floor. The only person, he said, whose opinion of me I was genuinely afraid of. Something crossed Nia's face, brief and complicated and gone before he could name it. That's not love, she said quietly. That's fear of judgment. Maybe it started that way. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Nia, I am not a man who... He pressed his hands together. I have spent my entire life building a structure around myself. That means I don't need anyone. That's not an accident. That's a survival system. And you are the only person in 20 years who actually got inside that structure, not by forcing your way in, but by being so consistently present and capable. And I kept not seeing it because seeing it meant the structure had a vulnerability I hadn't planned for. Nia was very still. I'm not asking you to come back, he said. I need to say that clearly. I did not drive 6 hours to drag you back to Seattle. I drove 6 hours because I said something to you that was the worst kind of lie. Not a lie about facts, but a lie about the nature of who you are to me, and you deserve to hear the truth before you built the rest of your life on top of what I told you that night. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up. She crossed to the window that looked out over the dock and stood with her back to him. And he could see the set of her shoulders, the tension and the effort of the control she was maintaining, and he said nothing, because he had learned enough in 5 years to understand that interrupting Nia Bellamy in the middle of a thought was never worth what it cost. I know you're telling the truth right now, she said finally. She was still looking at the dock. I can tell the difference. I've spent 5 years being able to tell the difference with you. She paused. That almost makes it harder. Why? She turned around. Because if you'd been lying just then, I could end this conversation cleanly. She looked at him with the directness that had always made other people in his world slightly uneasy, the quality of attention that made people feel they were being read at a level they hadn't consented to. What you're telling me is probably true, and it's probably too late. And I don't know how to feel both of those things at the same time without it being very painful. He held her gaze. So what do you want to do? He asked. Right now, I want you to leave. He didn't move immediately. Not resistance processing. And later, he said. I don't know what later looks like. She returned to her desk but didn't sit down. She stood behind it with both hands resting on the surface. You said you're not asking me to come back. I'm going to hold you to that. And I'm going to ask you to give me time that I won't apologize for and won't explain. Because I've been explaining and apologizing and managing your feelings for 5 years, and I'm taking a break from that particular skill set. Despite everything, despite the weight of the entire conversation sitting on his chest, the corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. That's fair, he said. It's more than fair, it's a gift. She looked at him steadily. Go home, Song-jun. He was at the door when she spoke again. Your 9 o'clock Tuesday's the one with the Port Authority liaison. She responds better to written follow-up than phone calls. Nia always she stopped. Caught herself. Corrected, I always sent a summary email within 4 hours. She keeps them. It matters to her. Tell whoever is managing that relationship now. He stood with his hand on the doorframe. Nia, don't. He left. He sat in the car for 3 minutes in the marina parking lot, looking at nothing in particular, and then he started the engine and pulled out onto the coast road. He was 20 minutes north of Black Harbor when his phone rang through the car's system. Park Jun-ho, he answered. Where are you? Park asked. Oregon coast, a pause. Did you find her? Yes. Another pause. And nothing. She's fine. He watched the road. What is it? Park's voice shifted into the register he used when delivering information he would have preferred not to deliver. We have a problem. The Kim Daehyun situation from August, the freight discrepancy on the Busan cargo. That was resolved. We thought it was resolved. But there's a Park paused again, longer this time. There's a federal inquiry. Low level, still in the preliminary stage, but one of our port contacts flagged it this morning. It's not general. It's targeted. Someone provided a specific reference point, a routing number from this August cargo that shouldn't be in anyone's hands except ours and 2 other parties. Seong-jun's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Who else had that routing number, he said. Not a question. That's the thing, Park said. 3 people in-house. Me, you, and Nia. The coast road was empty ahead of him. The ocean was gray and flat to his left. He drove and said nothing for several seconds. She didn't give it to them, he said. I know that, Park said. But someone did, and the only people with access to that specific number were in our internal structure. Which means someone else had access we didn't know about. Yes, a beat. Or someone created access. Song-jun drove. Pull everything from the last 6 months, he said. Document access logs, communication routing, everything you can reach. I want to know who had eyes on Nia's systems without authorization. Already started, Park said. There's one more thing. Say it. The federal contact who flagged us, the one who told our port liaison about the inquiry. He said the lead investigator made a specific mention. By name. Song-jun waited. They mentioned Nia Bellamy, Park said. By her real name. Not her role. Her name. They know she was embedded in the organization. They know she left, and they are very interested in speaking with her. The road curved and the ocean disappeared behind a ridge, and the sky ahead was the color of old iron. They think she's cooperating with them, Song-jun said. Or they want her to, Park said. Either way, if someone in our organization fed them that routing number and then pointed them toward Nia as the explanation, we have a problem that's a lot bigger than the federal inquiry. Song-jun thought about Nia in the marina office. The open ledger, the reading glasses, the careful, controlled exhaustion on her face. She was not cooperating with a federal investigation. He knew that the way he knew structural things, not from evidence, but from the foundational understanding of how a person was built. Nia Bellamy would not do that, but someone wanted it to look like she would. Or worse, someone was going to make sure she had no choice. He pressed the accelerator. I'm turning around, he said. Back to Black Harbor? Someone in the organization set her up, Song-jun said. And she is sitting in a marina office in Oregon, with no security, no knowledge that this is happening, and a federal inquiry that is going to reach her door before she has any context to understand what she's walking into. Park was quiet for a moment. If you go back, he said carefully, she's going to think you're... I know what she's going to think. He was already braking for the next turnoff to reverse direction. I'll deal with that problem when I get there. Right now, the problem is that someone inside my organization tried to use her as a shield, and they did it knowing she was already gone and had no way to defend herself. The car turned, the ocean reappeared. He drove south. Behind him, somewhere in Seattle, someone who had spent months inside Seong-jun's organization, building a focal and invisible trail, was looking at a federal inquiry they had set in motion and calculating with the cold patience of a person who had been waiting a very long time. How long before Im Song-jun's empire finally came apart at the seam they had spent years quietly cutting open? They were not wrong that the seam existed. They had simply miscalculated which thread would pull it closed again. Seong-jun was back in the marina parking lot 47 minutes after he left it. He had driven fast and without music and without calling ahead, because calling ahead meant Nia would have 47 minutes to build a wall he'd have to spend the next hour dismantling. And he didn't have time for that particular exercise tonight. Whatever was moving in Seattle was moving fast. Federal inquiries at the preliminary stage had a window narrow specific during which the people being looked at could still shape the conversation. Once that window closed, the conversation shaped itself. He got out of the car. The marina office light was still on. Through the window, he could see Nia at the desk, head bent over the ledger, in the same position she'd been in when he left. He pushed the door open. She looked up. The expression on her face moved through surprise, irritation, and something else in about 2 seconds flat. "I told you to go home," she said. "There's a problem." He closed the door behind him. A federal inquiry. Preliminary stage. Targeting a freight routing number from a cargo operation last August. She went still. "That routing number was internal," he continued. 3 people had access to it. Park, me, and you. Nia set her pen down. "They named you," he said. "By name." The lead investigator made a specific reference to Nia Bellamy and her role inside the organization. The silence in this office had a different quality than the silences that had preceded it tonight. Those had been emotional, weighted with history and unsaid things. This one was operational. He could see her shift into it, could see the particular quality of attention. That meant she was processing information rather than feeling it. "When did the inquiry open?" she said. "Our port contact flagged it this morning. Park thinks it's been building for 2 to 3 weeks, based on the reference point they're using. The August routing number." She looked at the middle distance. That number was in 3 places. The primary cargo manifest, the internal reconciliation file, and the exception report I generated when the Busan weight discrepancy came up. Yes, the exception report was in my system. "My files," she looked at him. "Someone accessed my files. That's what Park thinks." Not thinks. "Someone accessed my files, pulled that number, and fed it to a federal contact." She stood up, walked to the window, stood there with her arms crossed, not looking at the dock, but through it. "And then they named me to the investigators." Yes. "So the sequence is, someone inside your organization accessed my work files, extracted a specific piece of information that could anchor a federal inquiry, provided it to investigators, and then pointed those investigators at me personally." She turned around. "That's not opportunistic. That's constructed. Someone built that specifically." "I know. How long have you known there was a leak?" The question landed cleanly, and he answered it cleanly. 6 weeks of deterioration that I attributed to your absence. But Park started finding anomalies in the last 10 days. Access logs that don't match authorized users. Communication routes that loop through external nodes they shouldn't touch. 6 weeks. Something in her face shifted, not anger, something harder to name. While I was here, someone was inside the system. Possibly for longer. She absorbed that. "They waited for me to leave," she said. "Or your leaving was part of the plan." That stopped her. She looked at him with the specific focus of someone recalibrating an entire framework in real time. Sepsin. He could see it happening, the way her eyes moved slightly, but sorting through something internal. Running the new variable against everything she'd previously understood. "You think someone pushed you into that conversation?" she said slowly. "The night I left. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe they simply waited to see if it would happen on its own and had a contingency if it didn't. Who benefits from me being gone? Someone who knew exactly what you were doing inside my organization. What you were actually doing, not the official role. Someone who understood that the real structural protection wasn't the security team or the legal buffer. It was you. Nia uncrossed her arms. She moved back to the desk and sat down, not in the working position, but leaning back, looking at the ceiling for a moment and then at him. The exception report with the routing number, she said. I generated that in October last year, 10 months ago. It's been sitting in a closed file since the discrepancy was resolved. Someone kept it. Someone kept it and waited. She pressed the heels of her hands against the desk surface. Which means this has been in motion for at least 10 months. Possibly longer. She looked at him. You have a serious problem, Songjun. We have a serious problem. She shook her head immediately. No, I left. Whatever is happening inside your organization right now is not my... They named you to federal investigators. You are already inside this problem, whether you walked away from it or not. Her jaw tightened. She knew he was right. He could see that she knew, and could see that she hated it with the specific ferocity of someone who had constructed a very careful exit and was watching it get dismantled from outside. Earl appeared in the doorway again. This time his expression was not the mild curiosity of before. He looked at Nia with the directness of someone who had decided the situation had escalated past the point of polite non-involvement. You okay? He said to her. I'm fine, Earl. He's staying? No, Nia said. Yes, Songjun said at the same moment. Earl looked between them with the expression of a man who had successfully navigated 31 years of maritime business by identifying the moment to step back. He stepped back. Nia looked at Seongjun. You cannot stay here, she said. You showing up here is already a problem. If federal investigators have my name and they're watching, they're not at the watch stage yet. Park's contact is confident we have a week, maybe 10 days before they make formal contact with you. A week, she said it flatly. So I have a week to do what exactly? To understand who did this and why, before the investigators frame it for you in a way that leaves you with two options: cooperate against me or face exposure for your role in an operation you've already left. She stood up again. She moved to the far side of the small office, putting the desk between them. A sound like green wood splitting, and she stood with her back against the filing cabinet and looked at him with an expression that he had never seen on her face in 5 years and did not entirely know how to read. It was close to fear, not the animal kind, the lucid kind, the fear of someone who can see exactly what is coming and exactly how bad it is. Tell me what Park found, she said, the specific anomalies. He told her. He went through it methodically because she needed it, methodically the access log irregularities, the external communication nodes, the pattern of document retrieval that had occurred in small, irregular intervals over a period of months, careful enough that it wouldn't trigger any single automated alert, but visible in aggregate to someone who was specifically looking. Nia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a full minute. The intervals, she said, irregular, you said. Varied timing. Yes. Park said there was no consistent schedule. Because consistent schedules show up in behavioral analysis software. Whoever did this knew that. She pressed her lips together. This is someone with technical sophistication and operational patience. This is not someone acting alone on impulse. This is someone who planned it. Yes, and they had access to the system for months. Which means they had legitimate access, or access that appeared legitimate. Internal. Senior internal, she said. Junior people don't have visibility into exception reports from cargo operations. That file was in a closed partition. To reach it, you'd need either direct credentials or a workaround that required knowing the partition existed in the first place. She looked at him with the expression he associated with her most dangerous operational thinking flat, very clear, stripped of anything extraneous. Who in your senior structure knew about my file architecture specifically? Park, my operations manager, Choi Sung-won. And he stopped. Nia watched him stop. Who, she said, my finance director. Lee Hun-sik. Something in the air between them changed. Lee Hun-sik, Nia said very carefully. He's been with me for 3 years. I know how long he's been with you. I processed his contract. She was looking at Songjun with the expression of someone who is deciding how much of what they know to release at once. Did Park include Hyun-sik in the anomaly review? Not yet. Park started with the lower access tiers. Pull Hyun-sik's access logs for the last 12 months, Nia said. Specifically, pull the intervals when my partition was accessed and cross-reference them with his logged entry times. Not his official hours, his actual building entry and exit records. Songjun looked at her. You already suspect him. I noticed something 8 months ago, she said. A small thing. The kind of thing I would normally document and monitor and bring to you, when I had enough to support it. A pause. I didn't bring it to you because at the time things between us were… She stopped. Started differently. I was managing several things simultaneously, and I made a decision to wait until I had more. What did you notice? A vendor payment that cleared through a routing path it shouldn't have been near. $42,000. It could have been a processing error. The account it briefly touched before clearing to the legitimate vendor was dormant, not closed, just inactive. The kind of account that exists in a large financial structure and doesn't get reviewed regularly. She looked at him. I flagged it internally and kept monitoring. 2 months later, a similar amount moved through a different dormant account. Same structural fingerprint. You thought someone was building a parallel flow. I thought someone was testing the water, she said, seeing if small movements through secondary structures got noticed. 42,000 is not nothing, but inside the volume you run, it's small enough to attribute to routine variance. She pressed her hands flat on the filing cabinet behind her. If I had brought it to you then, you couldn't have known it would turn into this. No, but I waited, and while I was waiting, someone was doing something much larger than testing water. She looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked up, her face had the specific tiredness of someone who has just finished adding up a column of numbers and gotten a result they didn't want. The federal inquiry isn't the real problem. He waited. The federal inquiry is the public-facing part, she said. If someone inside your organization had been siphoning money through dormant accounts for at least 8 months, has built enough of an external relationship to feed information to a federal contact, and has positioned me as the explanation, they're not trying to expose you. They're trying to replace you. The room was very quiet. They're using the investigation as pressure, Songjun said. As leverage. To destabilize the organization enough that the people who are loyal to the position, rather than to you personally, start looking for a new center of gravity. She looked at him steadily. And they picked the right moment. You're structurally weakened because I left. Your financial systems are less coherent than they were 6 months ago. Your political relationships are degraded. And now you have a federal inquiry with your former right-hand's name attached to it, which means even the people who trust you are going to start wondering what I know and whether I'm talking. Songjun stood very still. They want the organization, he said. They want to walk into the vacuum they're creating, she said. And they need 2 things to create that vacuum. The federal pressure to destabilize you, and me neutralized, either cooperating with investigators, which destroys my credibility inside your world, or visible and apparently guilty, which does the same thing. The office felt smaller than it had an hour ago. Seong-jun pulled out his phone and called Park. Park answered on the first ring. I was about to call you. Lee Yun-sik, Seong-jun said. Pull his full access history. Building records, system logs, everything now. A pause on Park's end. Long enough to be meaningful. Songjun. What? I already started on the senior tier. I pulled Hyun-sik's records 20 minutes ago. Another pause. He's not in the building. What do you mean, he's not in the building? He logged out at 4:17 this afternoon. That's not unusual, he keeps variable hours. But I sent someone to his apartment 40 minutes ago, and he's not there either. His car is in the garage. His phone goes to voicemail. Park's voice was measured with the specific flatness of someone delivering bad news to someone who is going to respond to it badly. And there's one more thing. His assistant came to me an hour ago. She said Hyun-sik told her this morning to archive and compress the finance division's secondary files and send them to an external storage address. She did it because he's her director, and she had no reason not to. Songjun said nothing. The external address, Park continued, Traces back to a server registered in a name I don't recognize. But the physical billing address for the server account is a property in Portland, Oregon. Commercial real estate. I'm running the ownership now, but he's not gone, Nia said from across the room. She had heard enough of the phone call. He's in position. He already moved the financial files. That means he already made contact with whoever he's been building toward. He's not running, he's executing. Song Jun looked at her. He's been planning this moment, she said. The federal inquiry, my name attached to it, the files archived and sent out. This isn't panic. This is the last phase of something that has been building for a long time. She pushed off from the filing cabinet and crossed to the desk. You need to call your attorney. Right now, tonight, before the federal contact reaches you through official channels. If you get ahead of it, you can shape the conversation. If they reach you first, you're responding. My attorney is going to ask questions about the organization's structure. Yes. Answer them honestly. He looked at her. Answer them honestly, she said again, and her voice had the quality of someone who is not making a suggestion. Because the version of this that you can survive is the one where you get ahead of what Hyun-sik has already given them. The version you cannot survive is the one where they have his account of your organization, and you try to counter it with a story that doesn't hold up. Seong Jun looked at his phone in his hand. He looked at the door. He looked at Nia. I need you to, he started. No. Nia, I am not your executive assistant. I am not your financial strategist. I am a woman sitting in a marina in Oregon who has been pulled back into a situation I walked away from 6 weeks ago, and I need you to understand what I'm about to say very carefully. She looked at him without blinking. I will tell you what I know. I will tell you about the dormant account movements I tracked. I will give you enough to work with tonight, but I am not coming back to Seattle with you. I am not inserting myself into the operational response. I am not saving your organization again. He held her gaze. Someone named you to federal investigators. I know. You can't manage that from a marina in Black Harbor. I can manage my own legal exposure from wherever I choose to stand. Her voice did not rise. You need to get your attorney on the phone. You need to get Park running a full audit of what Hyun-sik moved. And you need to accept that I am telling you what I know as someone who once cared very deeply about protecting you, not as someone who has agreed to step back inside your world. The word once landed in the air between them. He felt it. He made the call to his attorney from the marina parking lot, standing in the cold while the wind off the ocean pushed at his jacket. His attorney, a Korean-American woman named Gloria Shim, who had been managing the legal architecture of his businesses for 4 years, and who was the most unflappable person he had ever hired. Listen to the situation summary with the focused silence of a person filing information efficiently. You need to come in, Gloria said when he finished. Tonight. I'm in Oregon. Then you need to drive fast. Because if the inquiry is at the stage your contact described, the window you have is shorter than you think. A pause. And the Bellamy situation, her name being attached to the inquiry. That needs to be handled separately and carefully. If she retained any independent legal counsel, she hasn't. She should. Gloria's voice was precise, because right now, from a federal perspective, she looks like either a cooperating witness or an embedded participant. Neither of those is a position you want her in without representation. He went back inside. Nia was on the phone herself, standing beside the desk, her voice low and controlled, talking to someone he didn't recognize. She held up one finger. Without looking at him, finishing the conversation, and when she hung up she looked at him with the expression of someone who has just made a decision they're not entirely at peace with. That was my sister, she said. She has a friend who practices federal law in Portland. I'm calling him in the morning. Good. My attorney is separate from yours. Completely separate. Whatever is managed between your organization and the federal inquiry is not my legal strategy and has no connection to it. Understood. She looked at him for a long moment. Go back to Seattle, she said. Call your attorney. Figure out what Hyun-sik actually gave them and how much of it is provable. She paused. And find him. Not to hurt him. Because until you know exactly what he told and to whom and when, you are building your response on incomplete information. Park will find him. Park needs to find him fast. Because if Hyun-sik has already completed the handoff, the timeline compresses. She looked at the desk, then back at him. The dormant account information, I documented it. It's in a personal file I kept outside your organization's system, on a drive I have here. I'm going to make you a copy, not because I'm stepping back in, because it's evidence of pre-existing financial irregularities that predates any federal inquiry and supports a narrative that someone inside the organization, not you, was constructing the exposure. He watched her cross to the filing cabinet in the back corner and opened the bottom drawer. She retrieved a small external drive, plugged it into her laptop, spent 4 minutes locating and copying specific files. She ejected the drive and held it out to him. He crossed the room and took it. Their hands didn't touch. She had made sure of that, a deliberate half-inch of space. This is everything I documented, she said. Dates, amounts, routing signatures, my analysis notes. Your attorney will know what to do with it. Nia. Drive safely, she said. The coast road north of here is narrow in the dark. He looked at her face. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has already said what they're going to say and is waiting, with genuine patience for the other person to accept it. He walked to the door. Behind him, he heard her sit back down. He heard the pen pick up. He drove north, through the dark, and the coast road was narrow the way she'd said, and the ocean was a sound rather than a visible thing present just beyond what the headlights could reach. He drove and thought about Lee Hyun-sik sitting inside his organization for 3 years, patient and invisible, building something that was designed to destroy everything Song-jun had built while standing close enough to be trusted with the tools to do it. He thought about the dormant accounts, the archived files, the federal contact. He thought about Nia at her desk, head bent, pen moving, returning to the work of a marina in a fishing town, as though the last 2 hours were something she could simply set down and leave for the morning. He thought about the inch of space between their hands. His phone buzzed. Park's name on the screen. He answered. We found Hyun-sik, Park said. Where, Portland? He's at the property, connected to the server address, commercial space. Looks like he's been using it as a secondary office. Park's voice was very careful. There's something else. He wasn't alone when our guy spotted him. Who was with him? A federal agent, Park said. Plainclothes, but our contact made the ID. He's been inside the building for 2 hours. Sung-jun gripped the wheel. He's already debriefing them, he said. Yes. Park paused. And Song-jun, our contact, got close enough to hear through the external wall. They mentioned the Bellamy name again. Hyun-sik is telling them she built the financial architecture that concealed the cargo operation. He's telling them she designed the dormant account structure. The ocean was invisible in the dark beside him. He's giving them Nia, Seong-jun said. He's giving them everything, Park said, and he's building her as the architect of all of it. The bookkeeping structures, the freight irregularities, the dormant accounts he's telling them, she designed all of it deliberately and that she left the organization when she realized the federal attention was building. Song-jun processed that. He's telling them she ran, he said. Yes. He thought about a federal investigator reading that account. A black woman with sophisticated financial knowledge who had been embedded inside a criminal organization for 5 years, who had designed complex systems the boss himself didn't fully understand, who had then quietly disappeared 6 weeks before a federal inquiry opened. From this outside, without the interior knowledge of who Nia Bellamy actually was and what she had actually been doing, the story Hyun-sik was constructing was devastatingly plausible. And Nia, sitting in a marina in Oregon under a different name, with no legal representation yet and no knowledge that her exposure had just become catastrophic, was approximately 300 miles from the conversation that was dismantling the rest of her life. Seong-jun had one hand on the wheel and his phone in the other, and the coast road dark ahead of him, and he understood, with the clarity that comes only when every option except one has been eliminated, that the careful distance Nia had asked him to maintain the clean separation she had constructed between her life and his, between her legal situation and his organization, was no longer something he could honor. Not because he was choosing to override her decision. but because the decision had already been made for both of them by a man in a Portland office building who was painting her as the villain of a story she had never agreed to be part of. He turned the car around for the second time that night. He was back at the marina in 38 minutes. He had driven the coast road at a speed that had nothing to do with caution and everything to do with the specific arithmetic of how much time Nia had before a federal investigation built on Lee Hyun-sik's testimony became something she couldn't talk her way around, regardless of what attorney she hired in the morning. The marina office light was still on. He pushed the door open without knocking. Nia looked up from the desk, and the expression on her face moved through surprise and arrived immediately at something harder. She had her coat on. She had been about to leave. "You need to call your sister's contact tonight," he said. "Not tomorrow morning, tonight." She stood up slowly. "What happened?" "Park found Hyun-sik. He's in Portland. He's been in a meeting with a federal agent for 2 hours." He crossed to the desk. "He's telling them you designed the financial architecture. All of it. The dormant accounts, the freight concealment structures, everything. He's building you as the primary architect and telling them your departure 6 weeks ago was flight behavior." The color did not leave Nia's face. She was not someone who went pale. But something in her expression went very, very still, in the way that stillness is not peace, but the thing that holds you together when peace is not an option. "Say that again," she said quietly. "He's telling federal investigators that you built the systems specifically to conceal illegal cargo operations. That your role was not executive assistant. That you were the financial engineer of the entire structure." She sat back down, not because she was weak, because her brain was running very fast and her body needed to stop so it could keep up. "He has documentation," she said. It was not a question. "He archived the finance division's secondary files this morning and sent them to an external server. Your name is on the exception reports. Your name is on the dormant account monitoring logs. My analysis notes document that I flagged the irregular movements," she said. "They document that I was tracking a problem, not building one." From the outside, without context, they read as someone managing a concealment system. She pressed both hands flat on the desk. "He inverted it," she said. "He took my documentation of suspicious activity and reframed it as evidence of my involvement in the activity." She looked up at Seong-jun. "That's not improvised. That takes time. He's been building that reframe for months." "Yes. Which means the documentation I gave you 20 minutes ago still matters. But it needs to be presented with context before his version becomes the established frame." Song-jun pulled out his phone. "Gloria Shim is my attorney. She is the most competent person I know in a legal context, and she is already aware of the situation. She can connect you to independent federal counsel tonight, someone with no connection to my case who represents you alone. You want me to accept a referral from your attorney. I want you to have legal representation before morning, and the fastest path to that is through someone Gloria trusts." He held her gaze. "You can reject everything else. Reject the connection to me. Reject any involvement in the organizational response. Reject Seattle and everything in it. But do not go into tomorrow without an attorney who understands federal inquiry procedure." She looked at him for 3 seconds. 4, 5. Then she held out her hand for the phone. He gave it to her. She walked to the far corner of the office and made the call herself, standing with her back partly turned, her voice low and precise. He heard her introduce herself to Gloria Shim, and heard, in the 3 sentences that followed, the exact professional quality that had made her indispensable for 5 years, the ability to describe a complex situation with complete clarity in minimal words, without panic, without anything extraneous. He watched her and thought about Hyun-sik in Portland, building a story that fit together with the convincing coherence of something designed from the beginning to fit together, and felt a specific cold anger that had nothing theatrical about it. He had hired Lee Hyun-sik 3 years ago, had trusted him with access to the financial structures Nia had designed because Hyun-sik was technically proficient and appeared loyal and had never given a visible reason for suspicion. Seong-jun had prided himself on reading people. He ran an organization that depended on reading people accurately. He had missed this entirely, and the cost of missing it, was currently standing in the corner of a marina office in Oregon, negotiating with a stranger for emergency legal representation at 9:30 at night because someone Seong Jun had trusted had decided to use her as the foundation of his escape route. Nia came back to the desk. She handed him the phone. "Gloria's connecting me with someone named Marcus Webb," she said. "Federal Defense, Portland-based. He's calling me in 20 minutes. "Good. I want to be clear about what this is," she said. "This is me protecting my own legal position. It is not me rejoining your operation. It is not me agreeing to anything except talking to an attorney." "I understand. Do you?" She looked at him with the direct, slightly exhausted quality of someone who has been managing other people's understanding of things for a very long time. "Because the last time you were in this office, you left. And then you came back, and I'm working very hard right now not to read a pattern into that. The situation changed. The situation changed because someone inside your world is trying to destroy mine. That is not the same as things between us changing." She pulled her coat tighter. "Don't conflate those things. I'm not." She looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether or not to believe that. He waited. He had learned to wait. Her phone rang. She answered it, walked to the window, and spent 17 minutes talking to Marcus Webb in the low, precise voice she used when she was simultaneously absorbing information and evaluating the person delivering it. He heard her describe the dormant account monitoring, heard her explain the exception report structure, heard her voice tighten, briefly, when she described what Hyun-sik was apparently telling federal investigators, and then heard it level back out immediately. When she hung up, her face was composed, but her jaw was set in a way he recognized. "Webb wants the documentation drive," she said. "Tonight?" "He's driving up from Portland." Song-jun looked at her. "The drive I have, yes. That's the only copy." "I know," she held out her hand. "I need it for my legal defense. Your attorney can request a copy through proper channels." He took the drive from his jacket pocket and placed it in her palm. She closed her fingers around it and looked at him steadily. "You should call Park," she said. "Hyun-sik has been in that meeting for 2 hours. At some point he's going to leave, and when he does, you need to know where he goes. Park already has someone on the building. Tell them not to engage, not to make contact, not to do anything that could be characterized as witness interference or obstruction." He was already dialing Park when his phone buzzed with an incoming call instead. A number he didn't recognize. He looked at it, looked at Nia. "Answer it," she said. He answered. The voice on the other end was unhurried and professional, and utterly familiar with the weight it was carrying. "Mr. M. My name is Agent Daniel Reyes. I'm with the Federal Organized Crime Task Force. I apologize for the late hour. I'd like to speak with you." The office was very quiet. Song-jun kept his voice completely flat. "You can contact my attorney, Gloria Shim. I'll provide her number." "Of course, I expected that. Before you go, I want you to know that we are aware of your current location. And we're aware that Ms. Bellamy is with you." A pause. "I'm not calling to threaten either of you. I'm calling because the information we've received tonight from a cooperative source has created a significant problem for Ms. Bellamy specifically, and I think she deserves to know that the window for her to shape her own narrative is closing." Song-jun looked at Nia. She was watching his face read the call. She put her hand out. He gave her the phone. "This is Nia Bellamy," she said. "I'm represented by Marcus Webb of Webb Federal Defense in Portland. Any further contact should be directed through him." She listened for a moment. Her expression did not change. "I understand. Good night." She ended the call. She handed him back the phone. "He knows we're here," she said. "Yes. Which means they've had eyes on the marina since before you came back." She looked at the window. "Or they had eyes on you when you left Seattle and they followed. The latter is more likely." She nodded slowly. "So we've been sitting in this office having a conversation that federal investigators know is happening." "Yes." She sat down in Earl's chair behind the desk, the position of someone who needed a moment to recalibrate, and looked at the ceiling and breathed deliberately for about 4 seconds. He watched her do it. It was the most unguarded he had ever seen her, and it lasted exactly those 4 seconds, and then she came back down from the ceiling and looked at him. "I need to call Webb back," she said, "and you need to not be in this building when he gets here." "Nia, you being here when my attorney arrives creates the exact image Hyunsik is building," she said. "You and me, in the same location, tonight. After he's told federal investigators I was embedded in your organization." Her voice was controlled and fast. "Leave. Go somewhere within driving distance, not back to Seattle. Stay reachable, and do not contact anyone in your organization about anything operational until your attorney says you can. And you? I'm going to talk to my attorney and figure out what I actually have exposure for, which I believe is nothing, and work backward from there." She looked at him. "Go." He went. He drove 3 miles north and found a motel that deserved the word only technically. And he sat on the edge of the bed in a room that smelled like old carpet and called Park and spent 40 minutes on the phone managing the operational situation from a distance, which was not how he managed things and not a mode he was comfortable in, but was apparently what tonight required. Park reported that Hyunsik had exited the Portland building at 9:52 and entered a vehicle that drove to a hotel 6 blocks away. Park's man was on the building. No engagement. Song Jun confirmed the instruction. "He's going to be back in there tomorrow morning," Park said. "Maybe earlier." The conversation tonight looked preliminary. They're building the record before they move to formal procedure. How long before they formalize? Webb is better positioned to answer that than I am, Park said. "But my read 3 days, maybe 4. Then we have 3 days. To do what? To demonstrate that the financial architecture Hyunsik is describing as Nia's construction was actually being used to move money that benefited him personally." Sungjun stared at the motel wall. "He built the reframe using her documentation. But if we can show the underlying money movements led to accounts that connect to him, not to the organization, not to me, to him specifically, then the story he's telling inverts again." Park was quiet for a moment. The dormant accounts. She flagged them 8 months ago. She documented the routing signatures. If those signatures lead to external accounts with Hyunsik's fingerprints, that's not a small task in 3 days. "No," Songjun said. "It's not." He was back at the marina parking lot at 6:40 the next morning, sitting in the car with a gas station coffee that was genuinely terrible when Nia came out of the office at 7:15. She stopped when she saw the car. She looked at it for a moment. Then she walked over. He rolled down the window. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had slept for approximately 3 hours and had decided not to be surprised by anything this day to produce. "Webb was here until 1 in the morning, she said. "I know, I saw his car." She looked at him flatly. "You sat in this parking lot all night." "I went to a motel." "I came back." "Why?" He didn't have a clean answer for that. He had asked himself the same question around 4 in the morning and had not arrived at anything satisfying. "Because you were in there alone with a legal situation that Hyunsik constructed specifically to isolate you. And I didn't want you to be alone with it." She looked at him for a long moment. "What Webb told me last night," she said. "The exposure is real. Not because I did anything wrong, but because the documentation reads the way Hyunsik designed it to read. Webb's strategy is to flip the framing, use my own monitoring notes to establish that I was tracking suspicious activity rather than directing it." She paused. "But to do that effectively, we need to establish where the money actually went. The dormant account movements, the external routing. If we can connect those flows to Hyunsik's personal accounts, the story he's building collapses. That's the same conclusion Park and I reached last night." She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but a recalibration of some resistance she'd been maintaining. "You were working on it last night," she said. Park was. "He has 3 people on the financial trail. The routing signatures I documented," she said. "The ones in the files I gave you. Your attorney has the drive. Webb made copies before you'd need to request them through channels." She looked over the car roof at the harbor. The morning was gray and cold, and the water was the same color as the sky. "I want to work the accounts myself." He looked at her. "I built those monitoring systems," she said. "I know what I was looking at. I know the structural fingerprints of those movements better than anyone Park has on it." She looked back at him. "This is not me coming back. This is me protecting my own legal position by doing the analysis that establishes my innocence. Those are different things, and I need you to understand that distinction. I understand. I'm going to need access to the full financial archive. Not the secondary files Hyun-sik sent out, the primary records. Park can get you remote access within the hour. Then let's go inside, she said. It's cold. They worked the accounts from the marina office for 11 straight hours. Nia at the desk, with 2 laptops running simultaneously, cross-referencing routing signatures against external bank records that Park's team was pulling through contacts in the financial monitoring networks Seong-jun's organization had cultivated over years. Seong-jun at Earl's relocated chair, in the corner, on the phone with Park in 30-minute intervals, managing the information flow between Seattle and the Oregon coast. Earl appeared at 10 in the morning, looked at the setup, looked at Seong-jun, looked at Nia. You want coffee? He said. Please, Nia said, without looking up. Earl made coffee. He brought it without comment and went back to the dock. He did not ask questions. Seong-jun noted this and filed it under the category of things that explained why Nia had chosen this particular place and this particular man to work for. At 11:40, Nia found the first clean connection. Here, she said. He crossed to the desk and looked at the screen she was pointing at. A routing chain complex, deliberately layered. The kind of structure that was designed to look like normal institutional money movement, but had a specific irregularity at the third transfer point that she had caught in her original monitoring and was now following to its endpoint. This dormant account received $42,000 in October, she said. It held for 9 days and then moved in 3 pieces to 3 different accounts. Follow the middle piece. She traced the path on the screen. It moves to a commercial account in Vancouver, Washington. Registered to a consulting company. The company has 1 director listed. He looked at the name, a name that was not Lee Hun-sik's name. A company he had never heard of. Who is that? He said. I didn't know either, but look at the registration date. She pointed. This company was registered 14 months ago, 6 months before Hyun-sik joined your organization. She looked at him. And the registered agent's address is the same street address as an apartment that Lee Hun-sik listed on his original employment application as his previous residence. The room was very quiet. He built the company before he took the job, Seong-jun said. He built the receiving structure before he was inside the organization. Which means he didn't decide to do this after he was hired. He came in with the plan already built. She leaned back in the chair. He applied for a position inside your organization specifically to execute a financial extraction scheme he had already designed. Seong-jun straightened up. He's not a disgruntled employee, he said. He's not someone who decided to betray me after 3 years. He was always going to do this. Yes. Her voice was flat, with the specific flatness of someone who is angrier than they're letting show. And he used me as the exit architecture. He built the scheme inside my financial systems because he knew that if anything was ever investigated, my name would be on the monitoring logs. He was counting on investigators reading my documentation as participation rather than surveillance. He counted on me firing you, Seong-jun said, or you leaving. She looked at him. He needed you gone, Seong-jun said. Because as long as you were inside the organization, there was a real chance you'd follow the routing chain far enough to find the endpoint. He needed you removed before the federal pressure arrived. The silence stretched. Someone told him about us, she said quietly. About the tension. Or he saw enough to calculate that it was eventual. Yes, and then he waited. She looked at the screen. And then it happened. Seong-jun's phone rang. Park, he answered. We have a problem, Park said. He sounded like a man who had been running on adrenaline for 14 hours and had just hit a wall. Hun-sik is not at the hotel. He moved. He was in contact with someone last night after the federal meeting. We didn't catch it in time. He used a secondary phone we didn't have flagged. Park's voice was tight. He's gone. Cleared the hotel at 6 this morning before our man came on. We have no current location. Seong-jun looked at Nia. She was watching his face, read the call again. He knows we're working the accounts, Seong-jun said. He has to assume it, Park said. If he knows you found Nia And he knows you're aware of what he told the investigators. He knows you're building a counter-narrative. And the only thing that counters his narrative is the account trail. So he's going to try to close the trail, or move the money, Park said. If the Vancouver account is the endpoint we think it is, and he can access it, and move the funds we document the chain to federal investigators, then the connection between him and the accounts becomes significantly harder to prove. Songjun looked at Nia. She was already typing. How long to move the funds from that account, she said. Not asking him. Asking herself out loud, because she was working. If he's using standard wire protocols through the commercial account structure he's set up, minimum processing is 4 hours domestic, 2 to 6 hours if he's routing internationally. Her fingers moved. I need access to the Vancouver account's monitoring flag. Park, do you have a contact in commercial banking compliance in the Pacific Northwest? Seongjun handed the phone to her. She took it without hesitation. Within 12 minutes, she had Park's banking contact on a separate call and was walking the contact through a voluntary fraud monitoring request that would flag any movement from the Vancouver account and create a time-stamped record. It was not a legal freeze. She didn't have the authority for that and was not pretending otherwise, but it created a paper trail of attempted movement that would be visible to investigators and significantly harder for Hyun-sik to explain away. She handed the phone back to Seongjun when it was done. Webb needs to know about the Vancouver account within the next hour, she said. He can file a formal request for account monitoring through the federal investigation. If Hyun-sik tries to move that money and we have a voluntary fraud flag already time-stamped, it looks like him running. Which it is. You just documented his escape route closing, Songjun said. I documented my innocence, she said. His route closing is a side effect. He called Gloria Shim. Gloria called the assistant U.S. attorney, whose office had opened the inquiry, and spent 22 minutes on the phone constructing the beginning of a conversation that would take weeks to fully resolve, but had, in this 22-minute call, meaningfully shifted its direction. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Marcus Webb called Nia's phone. She put it on speaker. The Vancouver account had a movement attempt at 2:17 this afternoon, Ms. Webb said. Wire transfer request. International routing. It was flagged by the voluntary fraud monitor your contact placed. The request is now part of the federal record. A pause. The lead investigator, Reyes, called me an hour ago. He wants a proffer meeting. With you. Nia looked at Seongjun across the desk. What terms, she said. Standard immunity proffer. You provide information. Nothing you say in the meeting can be used against you directly. In exchange, the investigators get your account of the financial architecture from the inside. Webb's voice was careful. Nia, this is a good outcome. This is them moving toward you as a source rather than a subject. What about Im Songjun? A pause. The proffer is about the financial structures. What you built, why you built it, who directed it. The investigation has a broader scope. Your testimony in the proffer is about your specific knowledge. That's not an answer to my question. It's the only answer I can give you right now, Webb said. The proffer is about protecting you. What it means for anyone else is a separate conversation. She ended the call. She sat at the desk in the Marina office with the 2 laptops open and 11 hours of account analysis spread across the screens, and she looked at Songjun with the most complicated expression he had ever seen on her face, and he had seen many expressions on her face in 5 years of close and complicated proximity. If I take the proffer meeting, she said, I am going to tell them the truth. I know, all of it, what I built, why I built it, what I knew and what I didn't know. And yes, what I knew about the nature of your organization. I know. That may not, she stopped. Started differently. I can't control what they do with what I tell them. I understand. She looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. You're telling me to take the meeting, she said. I'm telling you to do what protects you, he said. What happens to me is a separate problem. It's not separate. It's directly related. Nia. His voice was quieter than it had been all day. For 5 years you managed consequences that should have been mine to manage. You absorbed damage that should have landed on me. Maintained a position that requiring you to be smarter and more capable and more controlled than everyone around you, including me. And you did it without acknowledgement and without protection. He looked at her across the desk and the open laptops and the 11 hours of work between them. I am not going to ask you to do that again. Not once more. Take the meeting. Tell them what you know. Protect yourself. She held his gaze. Something in her face moved. Something real and unguarded and complicated that she didn't try to conceal. Not this time. And it lasted longer than 4 seconds. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her face changed completely. What? Song Jun said. She turned the phone around. A text message. Unknown number. 4 words and a photograph. The 4 words were, "She knows you're here." The photograph was taken through a window. A long lens. Sharp focus. It showed the interior of the marina office, taken sometime in the last 3 hours based on the laptop positions. It showed Nia and Seong-jun at the desk. And in the bottom corner of the photograph, just visible at the edge of the frame, was a second figure, a woman standing in the doorway to the dock, partially obscured, looking into the office. Nia stared at the photograph. "That's not Earl," she said. "No," Song-jun said. She zoomed in on the figure. The image quality degraded but held enough detail. A woman, standing very still, not looking at a phone or checking something, standing and watching, with the specific quality of attention of someone who was not there by accident. Seong-jun was already on his feet. He went to the dock doorway and pushed through it into the cold salt air of the marina, scanning the dock in both directions. Boats, equipment, fuel lines, a forklift parked at the far end. Earl 60 yards away, talking to a man on the fuel dock. Nobody else. He came back inside. Nia was on her phone. "Earl," she said when he answered, "was there a woman on the dock in the last 2 hours?" "Yes." "What did she look like?" She listened. "Okay, don't go anywhere. We're coming out." She hung up. "Earl saw her," she said. "An hour ago. She said she was looking for slip availability." He walked her to the registration board, and when he turned around, she was gone. She looked at Seong-jun. "Someone has been watching this office. Not the federal investigators. Someone else. Someone who sent us a photograph to let us know they were watching." "Hyun-sik," Song-jun said, "or whoever Hyun-sik is working with." She stood up. The Vancouver account wasn't his endpoint. He's not acting alone. He built this with someone who has enough resources to run physical surveillance on a marina in Oregon while he in meetings with federal agents in Portland. Song-jun's jaw was tight. "This isn't just a financial extraction scheme," she said. "This is an organized play for control of your entire operation. Hyun-sik is the inside piece. There's an outside piece. And the outside piece just told us they know where we are and they want us to know they know." His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it. The voice on the other end was not Hyun-sik's voice. It was a voice he had not heard in 3 years. A voice that belonged to a name he had believed was finished, a man named Cho Byung-won, who had once controlled the Pacific Northwest underground freight network before Seong-jun's organization had systematically dismantled his operations and absorbed his territory, and who had apparently spent 3 years building the patience and the infrastructure to take it all back. "Im Seong-jun," Cho said. "I think it's time we talked." Seong-jun kept the phone against his ear and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Cho Byung-won waited. He was a man who had learned patience the hard way through 3 years of rebuilding from nothing, and he wore that patience now like a second skin. "You have 30 seconds to tell me what you want," Song-jun said. "What I want is simple." Cho's voice was unhurried, the voice of a man who believed the board was already arranged in his favor. "I want what was mine before you took it. The port contracts, the freight routes, the waterfront holdings. 3 years ago, you dismantled my operation, piece by piece, and absorbed it into yours. I've spent 3 years building the infrastructure to take it back. Through Hyun-sik. Hyun-sik was useful. The federal inquiry was useful. Your assistant leaving was useful." A pause. "You built your entire organization around one woman's competence, Im Song-jun. That was always going to be a vulnerability." Song-jun looked at Nia across the desk. She was already writing. On a legal pad, fast and precise because she had understood from his expression that the call was significant and she was documenting every second of it. "The photograph you sent," Xiangjun said. "The woman on the dock. A reminder that I know where you are. Both of you." Cho's voice stayed even. "I have no interest in harming Nia Bellamy. She's not part of my grievance. But her involvement in the federal inquiry is now a public fact, and that becomes complicated for her if the investigation expands. You're threatening her. I'm explaining the situation. She walks away from this cleanly if the conversation between us ends correctly." A pause. "Meet me tonight, in Portland. Just you, and if I don't." Then the federal inquiry receives additional documentation. More specific, more damaging, not to you, to her. Cho let that sit. "I don't want to do that. I want the assets, not collateral damage. But I will use every tool available to me." Songjun's free hand was flat on the desk surface. He could feel the wood grain under his palm. He focused on the specific physical texture of it because it kept the anger from reaching his voice. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes, he said. 5, Cho said, and ended the call. Songjun set the phone down. Nia looked at him. She had the legal pad in front of her with a timeline, sketched in her precise small handwriting, what she had heard, what she had inferred, organized into a structure a lawyer could use. "Cho Byung-won," he said. She had heard the name through the phone. She nodded. "He wants a meeting tonight. Portland." "Alone." "No," she said immediately. "Nia, think about what you're being asked to do." Her voice was quiet and very fast. "You go to Portland alone. No witnesses, no documentation. You meet a man who has already demonstrated he is willing to use federal investigators as a weapon and physical surveillance as an intimidation tool. And whatever happens in that room, there is no record of it, and you have no protection. If I don't go, he releases more documentation against you. And if you go, what exactly does that solve?" She looked at him steadily. "He wants the assets, the port contracts, the freight routes. He thinks he can pressure you into signing them over in a private meeting. He probably can, maybe. But even if you sign everything over tonight, what stops him from releasing the documentation anyway? He has no reason to honor an arrangement that isn't legally binding and isn't witnessed." She leaned forward. "He's not offering you a deal. He's offering you the feeling of a deal while he takes what he wants and leaves you and me with nothing to show for it." Seong-jun picked the phone back up. She put her hand on his arm. It was the first time she had touched him since before the night he had destroyed everything, and they were both aware of it, and neither of them said anything about it. "Call Webb," she said, "right now. Tell him about this call. Tell him Cho Byung-won made a direct threat tied to the federal investigation. That is witness tampering and obstruction. That changes what the investigators are looking at." He looked at her hand on his arm. "You've been managing the exit from this situation," she said. "I've been managing my legal exposure. But there is a third piece that neither of us has been managing directly, and that's Cho himself." She took her hand back. "He's been invisible this whole time. He built Hansik as the visible piece specifically so that when the pressure came, we would be looking at Hansik and not at him. He sent us that photograph tonight because he wants us scared enough to act without thinking." "You're not scared," he said. "I'm absolutely terrified," she said. "I'm just good at not letting that determine what I do next." He called Webb. Webb's response to the information about Cho Byung-won was a silence of about 4 seconds that communicated a significant amount of legal recalibration happening in real time. "Do not call him back," Webb said. "He gave me 5 minutes. Let the 5 minutes pass. Let him call you." Webb's voice was clipped and precise. "The moment he calls again, we have another documented contact. Everything he says is evidence. Do not initiate, do not negotiate, do not confirm or deny anything about the assets." A pause. "And Im Seong-jun, his attorney, needs to know about this call as well. Everything Cho said constitutes an attempt to influence the federal investigation through threats directed at a potential witness. That changes the shape of the inquiry significantly." Song-jun relayed this to Gloria Shim in a call that lasted 9 minutes. Gloria was quiet for a moment at the end of it. "The assistant U.S.S. attorney is going to want to hear about Cho Byung-won tonight," she said. Directly, this moves the investigation in a different direction. A pause. I need to ask you something directly. The assets Cho is demanding, the port contracts, the freight routes, the waterfront holdings. How much of that is legitimate and how much isn't? A silence. Some of both, he said. Then we need to talk about that. In detail. Before you say anything else to anyone. She paused again. Tonight, he looked at Nia. I'm in Black Harbor, Oregon, he said. I know where you are. I'll drive to you. Cho called back at the 11-minute mark. Song Jun let it ring. It rang 7 times and stopped. 20 minutes later, it rang again. He let it ring again. At 11:40 that night, Gloria Shim arrived at the marina in a dark sedan and spent 4 hours in the marina office with Song Jun, Nia, and Marcus Webb in an arrangement that their respective professional obligations made complicated, but that the circumstances made necessary. They worked through the asset structure, what was clean, what wasn't, what could be documented. Splitting. What couldn't, with the particular grinding thoroughness of lawyers who understood that the next 48 hours were going to determine the shape of everything that followed. Nia sat through most of it without speaking. When she spoke, what she said was precise and directly useful. The way everything she said in a professional context had always been precise and directly useful. At 2 in the morning, when Gloria was summarizing the recommended approach to the assistant U.S. Attorney's Office, Nia asked one question. What does a full cooperation arrangement look like? For someone in my position. Gloria looked at her. Webb looked at her. Full cooperation meaning what, specifically? Gloria said. Meaning, I tell them everything I know about the financial architecture of Im Song-jun's organization. Not just what Hyun-sik built, not just the dormant accounts. Everything I designed, everything I maintained, everything I understood about how the operation worked. She looked at Gloria steadily. In exchange for complete immunity from prosecution and removal of my name from any documentation connected to the inquiry. The room was very quiet. Song Jun looked at her. That's a significant offer, Webb said carefully. I know what it is, Nia said. I'm asking if it's viable. It's viable, Gloria said. She looked at Seong Jun with the professional neutrality of someone whose job required her to separate her client's interests from her personal reactions. It would be viable. Song Jun said nothing. Nia looked at him. I'm not going to do it, she said. He looked back at her. I'm not going to do it, she said again more quietly, because most of what I built was legitimate infrastructure, and I am not going to characterize it otherwise to make a federal case easier to close. But I need to know that it's on the table. I need to know I have that option. She held his gaze. I need to know that you understand I have that option, and I'm choosing not to use it. He understood what she was telling him. She was not making a declaration of loyalty. She was making a declaration of agency, establishing, clearly and without ambiguity, that the choice was hers and not a constraint imposed by circumstance or by him. I understand, he said. She nodded once, went back to listening to Gloria. The proffer meeting with Agent Reyes and the assistant U.S. attorney happened 2 days later in Portland, in a conference room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and bad coffee. Webb sat beside Nia. Gloria sat across the room beside Seong Jun. They were in the same building, but in separate meetings that were being coordinated by the federal side. In ways neither attorney was entirely comfortable with, but both had determined was the least bad available option. Nia talked for 4 hours. She talked about the financial architecture she had built, its legitimate purposes, its operational logic, the ways it had been designed to protect the business interests of a complex, multi-entity organization. She talked about the dormant account movements she had flagged and documented. She talked about Lee Hyun-sik's access to her systems and the structural fingerprints that connected the irregular movements, accounts that connected to him. She talked about Cho Byung-won's call and the threat that had been made and the photograph that had been sent. She did not characterize her work as criminal. She described it accurately and let the investigators determine what it meant, which was the only approach Webb had approved and the only approach she had ever been willing to take. She did not make Seong Jun's case for him. She did not make his case against him. She told them what she knew and where the evidence was and what she had documented. And she answered every question they asked her with the precise controlled intelligence that had once made her indispensable to a criminal organization and now made her the most useful person in a federal conference room. When it was over, she sat in Webb's car in the parking garage and looked at her hands in her lap for about 30 seconds. "You did well," Webb said. "I told the truth," she said. "That's not the same thing as doing well. In a federal proceeding, it usually is." She looked out the window at the concrete columns of the parking garage. "What happens now?" she said. "Now they work. They have what they need on Hyunsik, the account trail, the Vancouver connection, the obstruction angle through Cho. Cho is a separate investigation, but the two are linked now, and the federal side is going to follow that link." Webb paused. "For you personally, they're not looking at you as a subject." The proffer confirmed what the documentation suggested. You were an architect who was inside the organization, but whose work was primarily in the legitimate side of the structure, and who identified and documented suspicious activity rather than directing it. "And Seong-jun." Webb was quiet for a moment. "That's Gloria's conversation." "I know. I'm asking what your read is." Another pause. "The organization is going to have to change. Significantly. The assets that connect to the clearly illegal freight operations, those are exposed. The legitimate holdings, real estate, waterfront property, hospitality, logistics with clean documentation, those are defensible." He looked at her. "It depends on how much he's willing to dismantle to protect what's left." She nodded slowly. The outcome over the following weeks was not clean. It was not fast. It was not the kind of resolution that felt like a door closing with a satisfying click. It felt like the slow dismantling of a structure that had been load-bearing for years, and the people working through it had to be careful about which walls they took down first. Lee Hyunsik was arrested in Portland 11 days after the proffer meeting. The federal case against him was built on the account trail Nia had documented, the obstruction of justice charge, stemming from his direct communication with Cho, and the attempted wire transfer from the Vancouver account that the voluntary fraud flag had preserved in the federal record. He did not cooperate willingly. He retained expensive counsel and spent 6 weeks trying to construct a defense built on the argument that Nia had designed the dormant account structure deliberately. The defense collapsed in the face of her monitoring documentation, which established a time-stamped record of her flagging the movements months before any federal inquiry existed. It was a harder problem. He had insulated himself carefully, and the evidence connecting him directly to the federal obstruction was circumstantial in ways that frustrated the investigators for months. What eventually undone him was not the federal case, but a civil asset forfeiture proceeding, connected to the Vancouver commercial account, which, once its connection to Cho's registered company was established, a sound like greenwood splitting created a documentation trail that reached backward through 3 years of rebuilt infrastructure and connected to accounts the federal side had been tracking for unrelated reasons in a different investigation. Cho's attorneys negotiated for 8 months. What he ultimately kept was less than he started with and nowhere near what he had tried to take. It was not justice in the clean, satisfying sense of the word. It was the available version of it, which was the only version that had ever existed. Seong-jun's situation required the most time and the most painful arithmetic. Gloria Shim spent 4 months negotiating with the federal side in a process that required Song-jun to make decisions he had been avoiding for years. The illegal freight operations, the cargo concealment structures, the routing irregularities, the port arrangements that exist outside legitimate commerce, those were dismantled. Not because the federal side forced a single dramatic confrontation, but because the alternative was a prosecution that would have consumed everything, including the legitimate holdings he had spent years building alongside the illegal ones. He had to pay. In real terms, financial settlements, forfeited assets, a civil cooperation agreement that required 3 years of monitored compliance. It was expensive, and it was humiliating in the specific way that things are humiliating when they confirm what a person has always privately known about themselves. He did it anyway, because the alternative was losing the part of what he had built, that he had actually built the waterfront property that had started as a single dock lease 20 years ago. The logistics company that employed 47 people and had been running clean contracts for the last 6 years. The hospitality holdings that had nothing to do with criminal operations and everything to do with a man who had always understood a sound underneath the machinery of who he had become, that legitimate work lasted longer than illegitimate work, and that he had simply been unwilling to pay the transitional cost until someone else decided to pay it for him. Nia returned to Seattle in March, not because Seong-jun asked her to. He had not asked her to. He had communicated through Gloria's office in January a legal letter, formal, requesting her consideration of an ownership transfer that had been in preparation since before the federal inquiry began. It outlined the restructured holdings, the waterfront property, the logistics operation, the hospitality companies, a small real estate management firm that handled the legitimate property portfolio. Clean documentation, full federal compliance review complete. 50% ownership offered to Nia Bellamy. She had the letter for 3 weeks before she called him. Not Gloria. Him, he answered on the second ring. You did this before the federal situation resolved, she said. Not accusatory, noting a fact. Yes, the ownership transfer was drafted when? November, he said. After Black Harbor. The first time. She was quiet for a moment. You drove 6 hours to tell me you lied, and then you drove back to Seattle and had your attorneys draft a 50% ownership transfer. Yes, that's not a small thing. No, another silence. He waited in it. I'm not coming back as your assistant, she said. I know. I'm not coming back to manage anything you're not willing to manage yourself. I know that too. If I look at this offer and decide it's real, if I read these documents and determine that the restructured companies are what you say they are, then what you're asking me to step into is a business partnership. Equal authority, equal responsibility. No hierarchy where you lead and I support. Yes, you've run things alone your whole life, she said. You don't actually know what that looks like in practice. No, he said. I don't, a pause. That's why it would require both of us to figure it out. She came back to Seattle on a Tuesday in the middle of March, when the city was doing the thing it did in early spring, not warm yet, but carrying the suggestion of warmth somewhere in the quality of the light, the way it hit the harbor in the early afternoon and turned the water from gray to something closer to silver. She drove herself. She had kept the car, the one that had carried her south through the rain 6 months ago. She arrived at the address. Seong-jun had sent her not his old office building. Not the downtown tower with the 42nd floor, where 5 years of her life had been organized around a man who hadn't known what to do with her but a different building, lower, with a glass-walled top floor that looked out over Elliott Bay. She parked in the street and sat in the car for a moment. She thought about the woman who had driven south in October, the jeans from the thrift store, the spotted mirror above the laundromat, Earl's coffee, which had never been good, but had always been offered without complication. The cold room and the radiator that made noise at night, and the strip of gray sky visible from the window. She had left something there that she was glad to have left. She was not entirely sure yet what she was coming back to. She got out of the car. The building's top floor had not been finished long. The paint smell was still faint in the elevator. When the doors opened, she walked into a space that was large and light-filled and looked out at the water with the specific quality of a view that had been chosen deliberately not for status, but for orientation, the way certain people need to see a horizon to think clearly. Seong-jun was standing at the far window with his back to her. He heard the elevator and turned. He looked like himself, and also like a version of himself she didn't entirely recognize. Leaner, the way a person gets lean when they've been working rather than waiting. The quality of stillness that had always been in him was still there, but it sat differently, less like control being maintained, and more like a person who had stopped fighting certain things and was quieter for it. There were 2 desks in the room. She noticed them immediately, the way you notice the thing a space has been designed around. Large, identical, positioned at angles to each other so that each had a full sightline to the water. No hierarchy in the arrangement, no throne and secretary positioning. 2 workspaces of the same weight and the same view. You built it already, she said. I had time, he said. She walked to the nearer desk and set her hand on the surface. It was solid under her palm. She looked at the view, the harbor, the water, the distant shape of the Olympic mountains, barely visible through the March haze. Tell me about the company, she said. They sat at the two desks, and he walked her through it. Not as a presentation, not as a pitch. He talked the way a person talks when they have spent 4 months learning something they should have known years ago and have arrived at genuine comprehension rather than performed familiarity. He knew the numbers. He understood the operational structures. He had spent the months since Black Harbor doing exactly what she had done for 5 years, understanding the machinery from the inside, and the difference was that now he was doing it as someone who had chosen to know it, rather than someone who had delegated the knowing. She asked questions, detailed ones, the kind that exposed gaps in a presentation or assumptions that hadn't been tested. He answered most of them. The ones he couldn't answer, he said so directly. That was new. She noted it. They talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, she had a legal pad with notes in her small, precise handwriting, and he had his jacket off, and the sleeves of his shirt rolled to the elbow, and the light through the harbor windows had shifted toward late afternoon. The logistics company, she said, the fleet maintenance contracts. Those are undervalued in the current structure. I know. That's a problem I haven't solved. It's not a problem. It's an opportunity. The Harbor District is going through a port expansion review. If we position the fleet contracts in relation to the expansion timeline, we can renegotiate at a significant premium within 18 months. She looked at her notes. I want independent authority over the financial division restructuring, not consultation authority. Decisions are mine within the agreed parameters. Yes. And if I disagree with a decision you want to make in the operational division, we talk about it, he said. We argue about it if necessary. We do not proceed without a decision both of us can defend. She looked at him. You practice that, she said. Several times, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not a smile exactly. It was the thing that existed in the territory, adjacent to a smile on Nia Bellamy's face, when something landed in a way she hadn't expected, and she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge. She looked back at the legal pad. Earl Duchamp, she said. Who? The marina owner in Black Harbor. He's been running on a line of credit for 3 years. His dock equipment needs replacement, and he can't finance it without killing his operating margin. She looked up. I want to offer him a supply chain partnership through the logistics company. Below-market fuel contracts and equipment financing in exchange for a long-term dock access arrangement for our coastal freight operations. Songjun looked at her. He let me use his office for 4 months without asking me a single question I didn't want to answer, she said. He brought coffee. He moved boxes. He told 3 federal adjacent extortionists to take their concerns elsewhere after I dealt with them. She held Seong-jun's gaze evenly. It's a good business arrangement. It also happens to be the right thing to do. Then we do it, he said. She wrote it on the legal pad. They were quiet for a moment. The harbor was silver in the afternoon light, and a container ship was moving slowly toward the port, and the city around them was making its ordinary sounds traffic, wind, the distant signal of a ferry. I need to say something, Nia said. He waited. The night you said what you said. She looked at the water, not at him. I have spent 6 months thinking about it from every angle. And I understand, now, why you did it. I understand the fear that made it feel necessary to you. And I understand that the fear was real, even if what you did with it was wrong. She paused. But understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the fact that they knew exactly where to strike. And I need you to know that I am not here because I have forgotten that. I am here because I believe that people can know something about themselves and decide to be different. And I am choosing to believe that about you. She looked at him. But if you ever use my vulnerability against me again, in any form, for any reason, I will leave. And I will not come back. And that is not a threat. It is the terms of what I am offering. He held her gaze. I understand, he said. And I need you to hear me say it directly. Not as an agreement to a condition, but as something I know about myself now that I didn't let myself know then. He leaned forward slightly, hands on the desk. I was afraid of needing you. I had built my entire life around not needing anyone, and you got through every layer of that without trying. Just by being consistently present and capable and real. And when I realized I was exposed, I did the cruelest thing available to me. I knew it was cruel when I did it. I told myself the cruelty was protective, He looked at his hands briefly. It wasn't protective, it was cowardice, and the person it failed most was you. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. Not forgiveness as a gift. Not forgiveness as a performance of magnanimity. Okay as in, that's the truth, I hear it. We can put it down now and start from where we actually are. She stood up, walked to the window. Stood with the harbor spread out below her, and the mountains faint in the distance, and the city's sounds around her. I missed this, she said, not to him specifically. To the view, to the city, to the version of herself that had moved through this world with purpose and intelligence, and had earned its place in difficult rooms. The city, he said. The work, she said, the real version of it. The part where problems are hard and the stakes are real, and being good at it actually means something. She looked at the harbor. Black Harbor it was necessary. I needed to be somewhere nobody needed anything from me for a while. But a marina's books are not a challenge, and I am not a person who does well without a challenge. No, he said, you're not. She turned around. Are we really going to try this, she said. Yes, he said, without the armor. Yes, it's going to be harder than anything either of us has done. Probably. She looked at him with the specific, clear-eyed directness that had always made people in difficult rooms adjust their posture. Then I need coffee, she said. Real coffee. Not whatever you were drinking when I walked in. There's a place on the harbor road. I know. I looked it up on the drive. She picked up her coat from the desk chair. Also the logistics company's fleet maintenance records. Do you have them here? On the server. I want to see them tonight. The renegotiation strategy is going to require a full historical audit before we can build the position. Tonight, he said. The port expansion review timeline is tighter than you think. She was already moving toward the elevator. Are you coming? He stood. He put his jacket back on. He looked at the two desks in the light from the harbor windows. Same size, same view, no throne, no margin, and then he followed her to the elevator. Outside, the March air was cold and sharp, and the harbor smell was on it, diesel and salt, and something that was almost but not quite the smell of the Oregon coast. Split scene. They walked down toward the harbor road side by side, not quite close enough to be touching, not quite far enough apart to be strangers, and the city moved around them with the ordinary business of its own continuing life, indifferent to what it had cost two people to arrive at this particular Tuesday afternoon. It had cost a great deal. The accounting of it did not come out clean. There was no version of the last 6 months that looked good from a distance, no narrative that resolved every grief into a lesson or every loss into a meaningful step. Seong-jun had paid for his cowardice in ways that extended beyond money, and some of those payments had no receipt. Nia had paid for 5 years of careful, invisible devotion, and she would carry the specific shape of that cost in her body for longer than she would ever discuss with anyone. But they were here. On a Tuesday in March, walking toward coffee, with a harbor full of working ships and a glass-walled office behind them, and 2 desks the same size. There would be arguments. There would be decisions they couldn't agree on, and days when the histories between them sat in the room like a third person, and days when they worked harder than either of them had capacity for, and they would have to figure out how to be honest about that without it becoming something else. There would be moments when Nia would look at Seong-jun and feel, in the specific place where the wound had been, a pull that was not about love exactly, but about the scar love leaves when it has been tested and has held. And there would be mornings, many of them, not all of them easy, when she would stand at the window with the harbor spread out and think about the woman who had driven south in the rain, and feel for that woman, something that was not pity and not pride, but the clear-eyed acknowledgement of someone who has survived themselves and come out knowing exactly what they are made of. She was made of a great deal. So was he. That was not a small thing to have discovered. The coffee place on the harbor road was warm, and slightly too crowded for a Tuesday afternoon, and they stood in line without speaking, and when the person at the counter asked for a name for the order, Nia said her own name, her actual name. Not Naomi Burke, not the executive assistant, not the architect of another person's empire. Nia Bellamy. The barista wrote it on the cup without looking up and called the next customer, and Seong-jun stood beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. And when their order was ready and they took the cups and pushed back out into the March air, the harbor was still there, and the mountains were still faint in the distance, and the city was making its ordinary sounds. They walked back up toward the building. Two people, neither of them ahead of the other.